Welcome to another episode of Random Thoughts from McCrae's Mind, the worst video channel on YouTube, because people will watch anything on YouTube. This is anything. Today we're going to be talking about why Tarleton State University is going to be good at football. This is about as random a video as you will find, and you're probably wondering, what is Tarleton State University if you happen to click and start watching? What prompted me to make this video is that Tarleton State was rumored to be moving into Conference USA and attempting to play a much tougher Division I schedule. Most fans of college football considered this rather bizarre and pathetic for Conference USA, and they ultimately did not add the school and instead went with the more established Texas smaller school Sam Houston State, which has been a football power at the lower level. To understand why Tarleton State is going to be good at both football and basketball, we have to go back in time to the 1980s. When I was in college, and Tarleton State was one of the smallest universities in the state and was an afterthought for pretty much any self-respecting college-bound student in Texas. The small Texas schools West Texas State, East Texas State, and North Texas State, along with Tarleton State, were considered what was known in Texas as shit-kicker schools. They were considered shit-kicker schools because it was imagined that the students at the schools were going to class with shit on their boots from attending to the animals in the morning before class, because these were all rural schools for the small towns from the area. Most of the students attending these schools were a little bit intimidated by attending larger universities and wanted to stay close to home. I attended West Texas State University, and at the time it was a school much more established than Tarleton State, which was playing NAIA football. There was little chance of Tarleton State competing with West Texas State in the 1980s. But that changed in the late 80s and early 90s when state funding for these schools was changed. Texas is an extremely corrupt state, and its school funding was no less corrupt. The state funded the University of Texas and Texas A&M almost exclusively, with some significant dollars being sent to Texas Tech and the University of Houston, a few other schools, and every other school was underfunded. In the late 1980s, this reached a crisis level, and even the Texas State Legislature was forced to take action to help the most struggling universities of the state. So the state went to Texas A&M and told them that they were going to be cutting their funding and giving the money to the smaller schools, or they could take over the schools and oversee them. Texas A&M obviously chose the latter, and all of these universities received a huge surge of funding, which allowed them to build new facilities and get their finances in order. It also made the schools somewhat more attractive, since the schools were now part of the Texas A&M University system and basically branches of Texas A&M. Tarleton State had an enrollment of maybe 5,000 students at the time, and decided to take some of their extra dollars and put it towards their sports programs in an attempt to become more respected. They subsequently made the jump to the Lone Star Conference, where they would compete with West Texas State and Abilene Christian, and they very quickly became an elite school in the conference. At the same time, the two major universities of Texas had reached maximum enrollment, and many students that were interested in attending could not get in, so this forced them to consider other schools, and the state universities around Dallas, Fort Worth, and Austin had a huge surge of enrollment in the next decades as North Texas State and Southwest Texas State became major state universities and are now larger than Texas Tech, something that was once considered unimaginable. And it's these two schools that you have to keep in mind when you're considering the future of Tarleton State. When I was in college, North Texas State was a bit of a distance outside of Dallas-Fort Worth, and its enrollment was roughly 15,000. Southwest Texas State was just outside of Austin, and its enrollment was similar. Both of these schools were basically on par with West Texas State athletically, which had actually had some success more. My university, West Texas State, has done everything wrong in the past 40 years with its athletic program, which I discussed in my last video, and cost itself millions upon millions of dollars. And Tarleton has done everything right and is on the verge of cashing in. More importantly, this is something the administrators seem well aware of, and they are moving aggressively to achieve their vision, because after all, much of those millions will wind up in their pockets as a result of the massively corrupt NCAA system. Tarleton State is located in the small town of Stephenville, Texas, which is pretty much only known as the town that produced Art Briles as football coach. Needless to say, football is a big deal in Stephenville, Texas. But more importantly, it is only an hour from Fort Worth. Enrollment at Tarleton State has already surpassed that of TCU by a decent margin and is now as big as Baylor. And those figures are going to grow substantially, and especially so once they are able to compete at the Division I level. So Tarleton is already capable of producing an elite college football team today if it were not locked out of the major television dollars that the established programs have managed to keep for themselves. But times change, and Tarleton will be gunning for both Baylor and TCU very shortly. And as a state university, it will have some advantages. Tarleton has already knocked off its parent university, Texas A&M, in basketball and played a close game with college basketball's most elite program, Gonzaga, which was also not much of a program in the past. It may not be long before Tarleton State becomes the next Coastal Carolina and is gunning for the top 25 in college football. And its inroads in college basketball are pretty obvious. And they also have an elite college basketball coach already in place, which is an indication of just how seriously the school is taking its athletic programs. So like many things you will see on this channel, don't be too surprised when it unexpectedly comes to pass. If you like more of this kind of prescient analysis on all the matters of the world, go ahead and like and subscribe. And remember, people will watch anything on YouTube, and this has been anything. Thanks for watching.